Hello, we're back, and in this part we're going to go slower and in more detail about the different types of creation of hair, the ones that I listed here, the 5. Though we're not going to go in step by step, that kind of detail in the earlier videos. This will assume more intermediate knowledge of the tools and some assumptions that you have those down already. Okay, let's go slower into extruded hair or polygonal hair. So it's first selecting the faces of the head, the scalp where the hair will extrude from. And it could be different based on your design. You could extrude and separate those faces to have kind of clumpy or spiky extrusions and then sculpt them. Or maybe you have flat hair where you can just select the scalp, kind of like a helmet, and then stretch that out and sculpt it again to make kind of thick singular mass of hair. In any event, it's based on face selection and then just extrude face and do it over and over again and sculpt and repeat. Now you can select symmetry or reflection for both sides of the head, so you can save doubling the amount of work that way. And remember, if you don't have a mesh that's perfectly symmetrical, if it's asymmetrical, you can put symmetry on a tool based on topology. I showed you how to do that in the other video, which will force any mesh into a symmetrical reflection. Here I'm working only on the left side of the head just for the ease of display. You want to select all the hair involved faces, and it's the most tedious part of this process. I use the paint selection tool. That's the one with the paintbrush and the circle right there. I'm sure you've used that before, where you can select vertices, edges, faces, and just paint them as a selection. And of course you can use soft selection by hitting B on your keyboard and moving around CVs and edges by heat map. So following your reference for whatever hair you have and using a lot of intuition is going to be necessary, because you're creating a very polygonal, obviously stylized version of the hair, very simplified. But that might be actually great for your work process, and if you use this character for a capstone, you know it's going to animate and interact very quickly. It might be just the very best practical choice for you, and it won't bog down your production or your workflow. Just to jump ahead with this, the next step would be to select all of the faces that comprise the hair, not missing anything, and then you're going to detach those faces and then separate them from the geometry of the hair. That way you can really control the UVs on just the hair. So then it becomes much easier to unfold the UVs just for the hair itself. Then you can concentrate on the painting and the texture and the bump, whatever it involves. If this were for a game environment, perhaps you try to get everything in the head and the body represented with a single UV map. Here's a couple of examples of 2 characters in a game. In a real economical way here, all the textures that comprise that character can be represented with a 0-1 square shell. There can be other real-time fast rendering game approaches where the head and the body are 2 separate 0-1 UV sets, depending on the specs and the demands of the game. Moreover, you notice here that the hair is embedded in the original texture for the whole head. There's not an entire separate UV set just for the hair in this case. So if you're making hair in this way, you wouldn't separate the hair as a mesh separate from the rest of the head. Then the UV shell would look like this, one painted UV shell representing all of the head and hair. But for this example I'm showing you, we are separating the hair, and we're doing multiple UV sets, one for the hair and one for the head. For the project in this class, you can choose whatever strategy works best with your design and that you want to choose. Next, we're going to use a way to make hair by creating hair cards. We did this before on the feathers. For the body. In this way, we're going to select the mesh of the head and say under Modify, Make Live. And that makes the mesh sensitive to being drawn upon. Then, when you do any kind of tool, like a Create Curve tool or Create Polygon tool, those lines will stick to the contour and the surface of the mesh as if it's like a magnet. That's what live is. And when you finish drawing on it, finish creating your cards, you just go back up to modify and say make not live. So here we can see the head wire is green, that is make live. And here I'm using the multi-cut tool to connect the edges. Here were the steps. I just clicked several times down the length to create medium length hair down the side of the scalp, which of course is sticking to the skull because of make live. Then I closed that up, and now I'm connecting the intersections to ensure they're all quads by using the multi-cut tool and connecting point to point. Then when I'm finished, click make not live, and then I can pull off the card, sculpt it, pull it a little bit away from the scalp, and apportion it a little better according to how it's flowing and hanging off the head. If need be at this point, then you have all quads. You can insert edge loops and, not getting too heavy, try to form a nice contour of a lock of hair. Anyway, using make live and drawing with the create polygon tool down the side, and then interconnecting the CVs to result in all squares or quads using the multi-cut tool. And again, this is for hair that's medium length or long or shoulder length. And we are designating clumps of long hanging hair. You could also do spiky hair this way. You can even create curly hair or twirled hair just by modifying and twisting the cards if you like. So it doesn't have to be for just straight hair. While the head is make live, you can draw all the way down as long as you want. And then again, interconnect the multi-cut tool. Then modify that strip or that card. You can insert more edges if you like to shape it. I'm just going to start with these 3 strips or cards and going to paint a transparency map of hair on top of those, and then I can repeat and cycle these over the head to save a lot of work. Then when you mix up these 3 samples over and over on the scalp, it's going to look like a multiplicity of hair coming in and all interwoven with one another. Now after I shaped the strips, I'm going to take each one and do a UV projection nice and flat. Here I'm using UV planar projection option box from camera setting, and then in the UV editor I'm going to shape this piece UV shell to squarely fit in the UV01 window, and I'm straightening it out here, and then I'm going to put all 3 strips on 101 UV shell. So I'm going to scoot that over to the left to make room for all 3 strips, and now I'm doing the second one UV planar projection and the third one, and I'll put all 3 UV shells, fit them lengthwise into a single square UV set. Okay, now I have those 3 strips all in the single UV set. I'm going to take a snapshot, go on and save a UV snapshot. I made the size of that 1000 pixels. And there's the snapshot in Photoshop. Now you can start drawing hair from scratch or get samples or take them from photographs, but I also have on the OneDrive a starter swatch. You can just download this on the OneDrive. There's a link on the website, and that can give you just a generic kind of straight dark hair, which you can modify, add to, etc. Now this swatch has an alpha channel already built in there. If you click on channels, you can see it, but since we're putting 3 up on one image, we'll have to recreate those alpha channels, and again, those alpha channels are used to mask out the opaque and transparent parts. So I've copied and pasted one of the swatches and oriented it to fit within the snapshot shell. Here I'm using the Edit Transform Warp tool to warp parts of the image to better fit the shell. And just Option left mouse button click and drag, copy that over 2 more times to have 3. And remember, I can see the UV snapshot through the image because I have the image layer on opacity about 60. Alright, now we're going to fill in all the other parts with white and finish this image. So we just have the 3 hair swatches, and we're going to begin the process of creating the alpha channel. So the white parts will be transparent, the light parts and the dark parts opaque. So what I'm doing is I'm going to color range selection, and it's going to select all the white and the white part, and then I'm going to click to turn that into a 4th or alpha channel. So with color range selection, all the white parts, you might have to adjust its sensitivity, fuzziness. All the white parts or the black parts are selected, and then you're going to go down to this button, create alpha channel from selection, and that will make a mask that will turn pink, indicating the pink parts will be transparent and the less pink opaque. So the background must be pink or masked out, not the reverse. And if you have the reverse, then you have to select the image of the alpha channel and image invert to make sure it's cutting the right mask. Okay, next I'm going to paint on only the alpha channel, that 4th black and white channel right here, and I'm going to paint on it with lights and darks. I am going to customize lights and darks in here. I'll just use either the paint tool or the burn and dodge tool, and using creative brushes here, just trying one thin line. And my goal here is to create difference in the transparency, so when they're physically laid on top of each other on the head, they appear to mingle and mix with the other cards, as you can see through one to another. So I'm choosing a creative brush here to simulate strands of hair, and I'm darkening. I'm just using the darkening property, and what I'm really doing is painting transparency when I paint dark. So I'm painting this dark on only the alpha channel. I happen to choose this creative brush, which has a splayed bristle pattern to it that might be good at drawing multiple strands of hair at once. So again, when we're drawing with dark here on the alpha channel, we're drawing transparency and what we can see through, or half see through. Maybe if it's gray, it's 50% transparent or 50% opaque. Then what we can plan for is, of these 3 swatches, give variety. One is very thick and dense, not very transparent. One is in the middle, and one is kind of thin and very transparent. So comparing them, it will seem that one swatch is dark, one is sort of in the middle, and one is very bright, all on the alpha channel, indicating opacity. Then when you arrange these cards on the head, you could take the most opaque and make that the bottom layer, and then put the less opaque cards on top of those. So you'll be seeing through layers of the cards from transparent to opaque, giving a more integrated and realistic appearance. And now you can see in the mask view from left to right how one is more saturated with red mask and the one on the right barely any mask at all. And now we're going to prepare this file to be rendered with Arnold. So we're going to create 2 JPEG files, one for the color, that's the painted hair image, and the second one we're going to save just the alpha image, that's the black and white mask image. Here I'll select the 4th alpha channel, and I'll copy and paste that to my main layer and flatten it and save that one out as my alpha. And we're going to import those 2 images in the proper places on the AI standard surface so they can be rendered by Arnold. Just like we did the feathers, the color image goes on the base color texture channel for the AI standard surface here. Then you put the alpha JPEG image, twirl open the geometry submenu, and then under opacity, texture icon, open and put in that alpha JPEG. Now we're going to share that same shader with the 3 hair cards. Just open up Hypershade under Window Rendering Editor's Hypershade, and you can find the shader you just created and drop it on the 3 different cards, and the UVs will just fall in place because you've already designed their placement in the 0, 1 space. Okay, some steps you need to remember about rendering cards in Arnold is the geometry. You have to select the geometry attribute editors and click the box that says opaque and click the check mark off. Otherwise, Arnold will render white in the background still. And also remember, when you're looking at transparencies in the window view, you have to go up to the window renderer viewport option box and select alpha cut and not the others like object sorting, or else you won't see transparencies. So to finish off this job for the hair with cards, you're going to have to spend a good amount of time placing and drawing them, make live, apportioning and rearranging them, duplicating and mixing up the cards to give a fullness to the hair and covering everything. But the benefit is it's extremely light and interactive and may be a perfect solution for real-time application or for your capstone. Here's a few rendering tests with very simple lighting in Arnold. And here, if you're getting this undesirable shiny part on your cards here, it has to do with the specular. It's really simple to fix. Just go into the standard surface and open up the specular submenu and change the weight from 1 to 0. That will take care of the problem. Re-rendering with Arnold now, and it's gone. Okay, then let's move on to the Paint Effects tool, see what fun we can have with that, how intuitive and creative it is, and talk about some of its limitations as well. All right, well, the first thing you want to do is select the head and make it paintable. It's kind of like making it live when you are drawing cards, but it's different in that it makes it sticky to Paint Effects tools. It's in the modeling menu set, then you select Generate, Make Paintable. First, of course, you select your mesh, so it knows which one to make paintable, and then it's ready to receive a brush. You say under the same menu, Get Brush, and you're given a content editor with tons and tons of things in here of all kinds of substances, and it includes a folder just for hair, which are just starting points. Because I selected Make Paintable, it makes that surface ready to receive a brush or paint. Here I selected a kind of hair, and I could change the brush size by holding B and dragging, and then left mouse button clicking and dragging to draw or spray effects all over the surface. What this is doing is drawing strokes, what's called strokes, which are curves which are going to sprout the effects from it. So just be careful you don't do little dabs like that. Do long continuous strokes and as few as possible, otherwise it gets awfully too heavy. And just painting right on it, and it sticks just almost like spray paint in a can filled with anything like hair, and it will just emerge from that surface. Now you might remember before we were talking about surface normals and vertex and face normals and tangents, the details that control the appearance of any surface. Well, this is how Paint Effects works. It knows that a surface and the normals are pointing outward. It's going to paint those effects in the direction that the normals are pointing. So if this surface of the head, you would display the normals inversed, so would the paint effects be painted on the inside of the head instead of the outside. If you have that kind of confusion, maybe you need to select your surface and say Mesh Display Reverse to inverse the normals of the surface, and thus reverse the direction of the effects as well. Now, creating paint effects is fast and easy, even fun, very intuitive. There's a lot of customization and control in there. You can select the strokes and go into the deep menus it has. You can change the color, the transparency as it fades in and out from the root to the tip of the hair. You can change the behavior. You can change how long it is, its global scale, or how curly it is, add twist or thickness, anything else you can imagine. You could even go by individual pressure individual hairs. It's really, really detailed. You could start by going in the outliner and selecting strokes, and then in the channel box and the attribute editor, getting deeper control to completely customize paint effects to whatever look you want. There's all kinds of demos too where you can draw splines with a spline with Make Live on the surface and attach paint effects to the curve. All kind of variations of that, but it has a pretty big drawback in that it's very heavy. It could be reactive. You could have forces and wind blow on it and all that, but it animates and interacts very slowly. And for Arnold to render it, you would have to convert it to polygons, and that makes it even more heavy. It might not be a good solution for real-time kinds of applications, and if it's in your own animation project, just use it lightly, or it might really slow down your ability to produce and animate quickly. And you can see here, after it's been converted to polygons, how really dense and heavy it is. And you can see after you've gone modify, convert paint effects to polygons, it can be ready for rendering in Arnold. And Arnold treats it like any other prepared surface. It renders the hair as very thin polygonal objects, and it looks very physical. Of course, this is just a ridiculous sample I'm doing for the demo. If you are using this technique, you'll probably spend more time to customize it for your design, but you can get very quick and graphic results with paint effects. Next, we have N-hair or fur systems. These technologies overlap a great deal, and I'm separating them in language only to compartmentalize them in description. I'm going to let this video play. I'm going to come back a little bit later when I have more time to give a full description of what's going on, but you've seen this before in the video earlier. Hair systems you can grab from the content editor, and they have these preset hair systems, kind of like wigs or toupees, and you can just pluck them out with the middle mouse button and drop them in. And the good thing about it is it can react to tension, to movement. So if you set animation keys on them and play them, you'll see them actually react. And that's a really great way to create complex animation. That's a dynamic. You don't have to animate it yourself, it happens automatically. Well, that can add heaviness to an animation interactive, so it may not be good for very quick kind of projects or real-time games. But anyway, you could just take a system pre-existing and reshape it and just put the piece kind of like a scalp piece right over your model and just make that scalp transparent. And sure enough, when you play it, the hairs already want to react, they already want to respond. And you know, it does take customization. Like paint effects, you can go into detail, change its color. Here I made the scalp transparent. You can change the behavior, its heaviness, its thickness, its stiffness, its springiness, everything about the look and behavior. Here it renders in Arnold. It's straight away rendering in Arnold, and you don't have to do anything else. And you know, it's very physical when it comes to Arnold, but in the viewport it looks very singular and stringy. But it's a pretty quick interaction. These renders happen fast, but it's just something you'll have to consider once again about the complexity of how it animates, whether it's going to update quick enough for you for your project. Last technique I'm going to show you is XGen and XGen grooming tools. In fact, I have a visiting tutorial here who is going to explain the grooming tools with XGen for you. Once again, please refer to the other video, the previous video to this one, where I get into a little bit more descriptive detail of what these techniques entail. And I'll be updating these a bit more step to step in the future and re-editing this video. Okay, thanks, and watch the rest.
XGen Interactive Grooming allows you to create and style hair or fur using intuitive brush-based tools. This is not to be confused with the older manual groomable splines found in the Create XGen description window. These are not compatible with the interactive tools, though it is easy to convert default splines to interactive grooming hairs. To create an interactive groom, first select the mesh or mesh faces on which to generate it. Next, go to the Modeling menu set and select Generate, Create Interactive Groom Splines. This automatically opens the XGen Interactive Groom Editor, which shows you the groom's base description along with 2 default modifiers. The sculpt houses and allows you to edit the layers that will blend the effects of the various sculpt tools. You can create additional layers to separate sculpt effects, then switch between the active one by clicking on their respective edit buttons, which turn red when active. The scale controls the global scale of all hairs in the groom. You can select any of these nodes and switch to the attribute editor to view their attributes, but it's easier to use the XGen Interactive Groom workspace, which displays them both at once. You'll generally want to start your grooms by adjusting some global description settings. In this case, we'll reduce the overall width scale and increase the taper to make the primitives look more hair-like. Also increase the overall density multiplier in the base node to thicken the hair up. And increase the overall scale to give yourself a good starting point. You can keep track of the number of hairs, the current active sculpt layer, and other useful information via the XGen HUD. Now you can use the various brushes in the XGen shelf or the Generate Interactive Groom Tools menu to style the hair. Use the comb and grab brushes to create the initial shape by dragging the cursor to change the direction of the hairs. You can turn on Symmetry in the tool settings to affect the mesh on both sides. To avoid hairs penetrating the scalp geometry, enable Collide with Meshes. You can also adjust the size and strength of the brushes here, but it's quicker and more interactive to hold B or M in the interface and drag the mouse left and right or up and down respectively. To create a part, use the Freeze tool to mask out hair on one side of the head. Then comb the remaining hair away from it with Symmetry off. Repeat on the opposite side. You can then use the Smooth tool to blend between the different areas. Although our initial groom looks pretty good, it's obvious that the hair arrangement is too uniform. Break up the uniformity by adding a noise modifier in the XGen Interactive Groom Editor. This applies noise to all the hairs at once. Just remember that the order of the modifiers will affect the results, so consider whether you want to add noise to the base description before grooming or after your initial groom. If you want to apply noise to a specific area instead, you'll want to use the Noise tool. We recommend doing this on a different sculpt layer. In general, it's wise to layer effects like this on top of your basic groom, so that you can adjust their strength values to show or hide their effects. Other effects you may want to consider layering include clumping, to reproduce the way hairs intertwine and clump up, and trimming or lengthening. Note that thickening or thinning via the Density or Width tool is not a layerable effect. You can shift right-click while any of these tools is active to quickly switch to another tool via the marking menu. Just make sure the appropriate layer is active each time. Finally, to change the color of your groom, simply adjust the attributes of its hair physical shader node. When satisfied with the groom, render an Arnold for the best results.